You really had the nerve to show up tonight. In that. My sister-in-law didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the four people standing nearest to us to hear, her eyes dragging down my outfit the way you'd inspect something you found stuck to the bottom of your shoe. I was wearing a black wrap dress I'd bought 3 years ago. It still fit. It was still nice. She looked at it like I'd shown up in a trash bag. I smiled. I checked my watch. It was 7:14 p.m. I gave myself until 7:20. I want to tell you what happened before I tell you what I did. Because the thing people always miss about moments like this is that they don't start at the dinner table. They start years earlier, in 100 small rooms, with 100 small silences that you swallowed whole because you told yourself it wasn't worth it. This was worth it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story travels. My brother Declan and his wife Amber had been together for 6 years. I'd known from the second year that she didn't like me, not in the way people sometimes clash and eventually find common ground. The real kind of dislike, methodical and consistent, like she'd made a decision early on and never revisited it. She called me practical when she meant boring. She called my apartment minimalist when she meant sad. She said things with a smile that you couldn't technically object to, which is somehow worse than someone who just says the ugly thing directly. Declan never noticed. Or he noticed and decided it was easier not to see it. I could never figure out which one. And after a while, I stopped trying to figure it out and just started accepting that my brother had chosen his life and I was not a central feature of it. The dinner was at Harrington's. If you're not from the area, Harrington's is the kind of restaurant where you valet your car, and the menu doesn't have prices. The kind of place where Amber's mother, Gretchen, had insisted on celebrating Declan's promotion to regional vice president. It was a family dinner. Amber's family, Declan's family, my parents, me. I drove myself. I parked in the garage 2 blocks over because I wasn't going to pay $22 for valet when I could walk 2 blocks. Amber clocked that immediately when I arrived. She didn't say anything then. She saved it. The restaurant was beautiful. I will give it that. 40-foot ceilings with warm amber light, white tablecloths pressed so flat they looked laminated, a sommelier who materialized at your elbow like smoke. Amber's parents were already seated at the round table near the window when I arrived. Her father, a retired orthodontist named Frank who laughed at everything he said, stood up and shook my hand. Her mother, Gretchen, looked at my dress, looked at my shoes, looked back up at my face, and produced a smile that didn't involve her eyes in any way. I sat down next to my mother. Declan arrived 10 minutes later, flushed with the particular kind of happiness that comes from being celebrated, and the table rearranged itself around him the way tables do around people who are used to being the center. He hugged me quickly. Amber glided in behind him in a dress that cost more than my car payment and took the seat directly across from me. The first hour was fine. Wine was poured, bread arrived. Frank made a toast that went on 4 minutes too long. My father clapped Declan on the shoulder and said he was proud, and I watched my brother's face do the thing it does when he gets emotional but doesn't want to show it. I felt something warm and genuine in my chest for about 30 seconds. Then Amber leaned forward. She was talking to her mother about the new house. They'd just closed on a property in Westlake. 4 bedrooms, a pool, a backyard with a view of the hills. They'd gotten a good deal, Amber said. A really good deal. She said the word deal and looked at me. You're still renting, right? She asked. Casual, the way you'd ask what someone ordered. I am, I said. That's smart. She picked up her wine glass. For some people, it really makes more sense. Not everyone needs the equity. She said it to her mother, not to me. As if I'd already left the table. I took a sip of water. My mother shifted in her seat. The entrees came. The conversation turned back to Declan, to his new territory, to the team he was managing, to the quiet list he'd inherited. He was animated and confident and genuinely happy, and I was glad for him. I was. But underneath the glad was something else, something quieter, that I'd been carrying around for a long time and had gotten very good at not looking at directly. 3 years ago, when Declan was starting out in sales and his commissions weren't covering his expenses yet, our parents called me. They didn't call him. They called me. I was the one with the savings account and the steady job and the CPA license I'd spent 4 years and $60,000 in student loans acquiring. I had been putting money aside for 2 years, not for anything extravagant, just for the down payment on a small condo, the first real thing I was ever going to own. Declan needed $18,000 to cover 6 months of expenses while he found his footing. Dad said it would just be temporary. Dad said Declan would pay it back when things stabilized. Declan never paid it back. Not because he's malicious. I don't think he's malicious. But because once something becomes part of the arrangement, people stop seeing it as a debt and start seeing it as a given. My $18,000 became a given. I drove a car with a check engine light that stayed on for 14 months because I didn't have the savings cushion anymore to deal with it. I ate lunch at my desk every day for a year. I didn't take a vacation. I rebuilt slowly, quietly, while Declan's career took off on the runway I had paved with my own money. And then he met Amber, and Amber decided I was a person to look down at. That's the ledger, the one nobody talks about, the one the people who benefit from it most act like doesn't exist. I picked up my fork and cut into my salmon and decided I was done. Not done at the table. Done with the arrangement. Done with the role I've been quietly playing for years. The reliable one, the practical one, the one who doesn't need much and doesn't ask for anything and can always be counted on to absorb the cost of other people's choices. Done with all of it. I just needed to wait for the right moment. I didn't have to wait long. After the entrees were cleared, while we were waiting for dessert, Amber was telling a story about a colleague at her firm who had bought into a bad investment. And she was being somewhat funny about it, actually. She was good at stories when she wanted to be. And then she paused and turned to me and said, "Kind of like how you passed on buying your apartment when you had the chance. Right? Your landlord sold the building? What did you do? Just sign a new lease?" She laughed once. Light. Practiced. "That must have stung," Gretchen said, looking at me with the specific expression of someone enjoying someone else's minor suffering. "You really had the nerve to show up tonight in that." Those were the words Amber said a moment later, when the table had shifted again and it was briefly just us on one side of the conversation. Her eyes went to my dress again. Her voice was quiet but not private. "I mean, it's a celebration dinner. You couldn't have made more of an effort?" The table went still. Declan was looking at his water glass. My father cleared his throat. My mother's hand moved to her napkin. Nobody said anything. I checked my watch. 7,014. I gave myself until 7:20. Amber picked up her glass and tilted her head at me with a tiny smile that said she knew I wouldn't do anything. She had calculated that I was the kind of person who absorbs things. She had done that math a dozen times over 6 years and it had always come out the same. Quiet sister. Practical sister. The one who pays and parks 2 blocks away and shows up in a 3-year-old dress and doesn't make a fuss. She forgot something. She forgot that the person who has been absorbing things for years and years is not someone who has no limits. They're someone who has been carefully calculating the exact right moment. I set down my fork. I reached into my bag. I placed a white business card on the white tablecloth, face up, in the center of the table where everyone could see it. Declan looked at it first, then frowned. "What is this?" The card said Halcyon Group, LLC, Principal and Managing Director, my name beneath it. "That's my company," I said. Amber looked at the card, then at me. "You work in accounting." "I do," I said. "I'm also the majority owner of a commercial real estate holding company that acquires and manages restaurant properties." I let that sit for 1 second, including this building. The silence was physical. It had weight. Frank put down his fork. Gretchen's smile went somewhere and didn't come back. Declan looked at me the way you look at someone you thought you knew the dimensions of and are suddenly realizing you've been wrong about in a significant way. Amber laughed. "It came out wrong. Too sharp, a little high. No, that's not. This is Harrington's. This has been here for decades." "Harrington's leases from Halcyon Group," I said. "We acquired the property 4 years ago. The new long-term lease renewed in January." I pulled out my phone. I opened a lease management portal I use to monitor all 12 properties in our portfolio. I turned the screen so Declan could see. His face went from confused to pale in approximately 4 seconds. "I don't advertise what I do," I said. I wasn't performing for the table. I was just talking. It's important that you understand that distinction. I wasn't doing a speech. I wasn't announcing anything. I was just saying a thing that was true, quietly, in the same voice I've always used. I've never told you because you wouldn't have seen me the same way. You would have seen a resource. You would have called me with opportunities. You would have treated dinner like a pitch meeting. I looked at Declan directly. You actually already did that once, with my savings. Declan opened his mouth, closed it. I have a very clear record, I said, of every dollar I've moved for this family. I swiped on my phone, a spreadsheet. Clean columns, dates, amounts, recipients. My $18,000 to Declan in 2021. The $6,200 to sent my parents when their HVAC system failed the winter after that. The $3,400 I put toward my mother's dental work when her insurance gap came through. Numbers that had never been put in a row before because I had never put them in a row before. I had just quietly let them happen and quietly rebuilt afterward and quietly told myself it was what families do. I turned the screen toward the table. The total at the bottom was $31,400. That's what I've contributed to this family in 3 years, I said. It's not a complaint, I'm just making sure we all have the same information. My mother made a sound, small, like something catching in her chest. Amber was very still, the version of her that had made that comment about my dress. The easy, certain version was gone. She was calculating, and for the first time in 6 years, the math was not working in her favor. Aubrey, Declan said. My name. He said it like a question. I need you to understand something. I said. I have been the person in this family who fills in the gaps. Every gap. Without being asked. Without being thanked. Without being treated like someone whose opinion or presence or effort matters at a celebration dinner. I picked up my wine glass. Tonight, your wife told me I didn't make enough effort in front of everyone at this table, and nobody said a word. I looked at my brother, and including you. He didn't respond. He looked at the tablecloth. Declan, I said, I paid for the suit you were wearing when you interviewed for the job you just got promoted from. That landed differently than anything else I'd said. I watched his face process it, the memory surfacing, reshaping, the thing he told himself about that money rearranging into something he couldn't smooth over. He'd been short on cash 3 months before that interview. He'd called me embarrassed, knowing it was a lot to ask. I'd wired him $1,200 and told him to get something that fit properly and to go get the job. He did. He never mentioned it again, and I never brought it up. Until now. I'm not angry at you, I said, and I meant it. I'm tired. There's a difference. I looked at Amber. But I am angry at her. Amber's jaw was tight. You don't get to come into my family dinner and… It's my dinner too, I said. And for the record, it's my building. I don't know what Amber expected. I think she expected me to cry, or to deflect, or to quietly absorb the comments about my dress and excuse myself to the bathroom and come back with a fixed expression and get through the rest of the meal. I had done versions of that exact thing more times than I could count. It had been my whole strategy for years. Survive the dinner, drive home, rebuild privately. Not tonight. I looked at Gretchen, who was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Something like recalibration. I looked at Frank, who had gone very quiet and was studying the edge of his bread plate. I looked at my mother, who had tears in her eyes. Whether from guilt or pride or some complicated mixture of both, I genuinely couldn't tell you. I looked at my father, whose face had gone through 4 different emotions in the last 60 seconds and had landed on something that looked like relief. Like he'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone had just taken it from him. I looked at Declan. He was staring at the spreadsheet on my phone screen. He was doing what people do when the story they've been living inside turns out to have a version they weren't shown. I could see the moment it happened. The version of our history that centered on his success, quietly making room for the version where someone was quietly under it, holding it up. I don't want the money back, I said. I don't want anything back. I want you to know what it cost. I set my phone face down on the table. I want you to know what it costs to have a sister like me, and I want you to decide, going forward, whether you actually want to keep her. The dessert arrived. The server set down 5 small plates of something architectural with chocolate and a single gold leaf on top, and then looked at the silence around the table and retreated very quickly. Nobody moved. Finally, Declan reached across the table. He put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything for a moment. When he did speak, his voice was lower than I'd heard it in years. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the problem." Amber excused herself to the restroom. Gretchen said something quietly to Frank. My mother reached over and squeezed my arm. My father said, "She's right, to no one in particular." And Frank said, "Yes," which surprised everyone. Amber came back to the table a different person. I don't mean transformed. I'm not telling you a story with a bow at the end. I mean she was quieter. The particular kind of quiet that comes from a recalculation that didn't go the way you expected. She didn't apologize that night. Not with words. She ate her dessert and looked at the table mostly and at one point said to my mother, "I didn't realize how much she'd done," and my mother said, "Neither did we," and something in that small exchange settled something that had been unsettled for a very long time. I drove myself home. I parked in my own garage in the building I owned 4 blocks from my apartment. The one with the 12-unit commercial portfolio I'd been building for 5 years in complete silence. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. I'm not going to tell you it felt like winning. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 3 years straight. There's a kind of relief that comes from being seen that doesn't feel triumphant. It just feels like the absence of a weight you'd stop noticing because you've been carrying it for so long. Declan called me the next morning. We talked for 45 minutes. He started to say something about the money, and I stopped him and said, "I don't want to talk about the money. I want to talk about what happens next." He said okay. He meant it, I think. We'll see. Here's what I know for certain. I spent years being the person who kept things running in the background. The practical one. The quiet one. The one who paid for things and didn't make a fuss and showed up in sensible shoes and let other people stand in the light while she made sure the power was on. I was good at it. I am still good at it. But I learned something at a white tablecloth in a building I own, sitting across from a woman who thought she had me figured out. Quiet is not the same as small, and patience is not the same as surrender. The debt was never about money, it was about being seen. They see me now. I've thought a lot about that night since it happened. Not obsessively, I'm not someone who replays things on a loop. But the way you turn a smooth stone over in your hand sometimes, just feeling the weight of it. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened at that table was an accident. Not what Amber did, not what I did. Not even the silence from Declan when he should have spoken. Every action in that room was the result of something that had been set in motion years earlier, compounding quietly the way interest does in an account nobody checks. When I wired Declan that $18,000, I told myself it was what good people do for family, and it was. But somewhere in the years that followed, the doing right became invisible. To them and, honestly, to me too. I stopped accounting for it. I just kept absorbing and rebuilding and telling myself the score would settle on its own. It doesn't work that way. What you allow to go unnamed doesn't disappear. It just builds a foundation that other people stand on without knowing it's there, and eventually, they start to believe the ground is just naturally solid beneath their feet. That's not a moral failing on their part alone. Part of it was mine. I was so committed to being the person who doesn't make things difficult that I made it easy for the people I love to forget what I'd cost myself to help them. Silence isn't always humility. Sometimes it's just a different kind of mistake. What changed that night wasn't that I got angry. Anger I'd had plenty of, quiet and carefully managed, for a long time. What changed is that I stopped treating the truth like a burden I had to carry alone to protect everyone else's comfort. I put it on the table, literally, and something shifted in the room that I don't think will shift back, which is exactly what needed to happen. I think about what it actually took to get to that moment. Not just one thing. It was 3 things working together, and I couldn't have done it with just one or two. There was the discipline of having built something real over 5 years of deliberate, unglamorous work. The kind of intelligence that doesn't announce itself, that just keeps showing up and making better decisions than the last ones. There was the integrity of it. I didn't build Halcyon Group to get revenge on anyone. I built it because I believed in the work and in myself, and the fact that it also happened to tell a larger truth at night was a consequence, not the goal. And there was the stamina of having stayed the course through years, when nobody in that family saw me clearly. When I was just the practical one, the reliable one, the one who parks 2 blocks away and doesn't make a fuss. I didn't stop. I kept building anyway. Those three things together, the sharpness to see clearly, the integrity to act rightly, and the endurance to keep going when nothing around you reflects back what you know to be true about yourself. That combination is what put that business card on the table. Not luck, not timing, the long, quiet work of becoming someone whose presence eventually requires acknowledgement. Declan and I are in a different place now. It's not fixed. You don't fix 6 years of inherited blindness in one dinner conversation. But the door is open in a way it wasn't before, and we're both walking through it carefully. That matters to me more than any number on a spreadsheet. What I know for certain is that being seen was always possible. I just had to stop making it so easy for everyone to look away.